My name's Jamie. I work for a company called Miniclip, and I'm here today to talk to you about .io game. What is a .io game? Does anyone know what a .io game is? Anyone got any previous experience? What do you play, sir? Slither. Any others? Gario? He makes all the games and he plays them as well. You're a legend, sir. Thank you. We'll come back to you later. So, some of you may have noticed, maybe through titles like this, that there's this kind of phenomena of .io games. Big, accessible, browser-based, multiplayer games popping up. So today, what I thought would be interesting, as we as a company have been involved in this somewhat, to just talk about what makes a .io, in our opinion, what are the challenges to both developing and publishing these kinds of games, and what might the opportunities be in the future. Some of you might be familiar with the company Miniclip. We are a self-styled leading digital games company. So our company began in 2001. So did my daughter, actually, Martha. I love them both dearly, although I would say that Martha's somewhat better looking than Miniclip. So it's just approaching 16 years old. We started doing browser-based games, online of course, and built up a pretty large web portal around that, which enabled us to do lots of work with a lot of different developers, small teams around the world. We were then able to move into mobile, and recently we reached 1 billion downloads, which was announced a few weeks ago, of games like Pool, but also games like Agario, which has been a huge success and came from this IO phenomena. So we reckon we reach about 200 million monthly active users, so we've got a pretty big network out there at the moment. I've been at the company for just coming up to 6 years now, working as a producer, working primarily on the web. So I started out doing internal games production with our internal Flash Games team, working with our mobile development guys who are based in Lisbon and in Genova in Italy. And I've worked on lots of different titles. I mean, we release about 100 games a year on the web, mostly licenses of existing games, but some commissions in there as well. And we're just working on, I'm the executive producer of our first console game, which is called MX Nitro, and I urge you to rush to your PS4 or Xbox One to download that next week. But IO, some guys already mentioned this game, Agario. Okay, so this came out April 2015, developed by basically one guy, a young Brazilian guy, Mateus Valadares. He's in Brazil. And my colleague Sergio, who's the head of our mobile studio, his young cousin had said, oh look, there's this amazing game called Agario, playing in a browser. Everyone's talking about it, it's really cool. So Sergio checked it out. Thought, yeah, this is kind of weird, but kind of interesting. Like you play this cell and you float around on what looks like graph paper, and you kind of eat other cells. Okay. And over the course of a week, this like took over our offices. Like our work literally stopped. It's like, guys, we're supposed to be making games, right? Like, stop playing games. Stop, get back to work. And when you see that happening, I saw this happening in our office with a game called Hacksball one time, and you know that there's something special about it when it kind of hooks people like that in a group. Anyway, Sergio called Mateus and said, dude, love what you're doing. You're trending, it's blowing up. Come to Lisbon, let's do a deal. So within a week of hearing about the game, Mateus came to Lisbon, did some business, agreed a deal for us to publish the game. And then a few weeks after that, and I think this is quite important, PewDiePie picked up on the game and did the first of what turned out to be a series of videos. And at that point, that was like kind of rocket fuel. So that sent the numbers through the roof. And I think Agar.io, as the first to sort of establish this genre, there are definitely some key points in what that game does and how it feels to the player. So I guess the first key point I would make is I.O. games tend to be super accessible. They are made in HTML5, JavaScript. They work in browsers now, which I think is a moment in time, a sort of technological development that browsers are able to support these games and run them. They are easy to learn, hard to master, so they have a really nice kind of flow curve. So whoever you are, whatever kind of player you are, you can find your way into the game and have a good session in a game, maybe a short session, a long session. There's a really nice flow curve, kind of flow challenge curve on that. And there's also something cultural about them, and I think this really goes to why, when these things take off, they achieve this amazing virality. So Agar.io had a very open system of adding usernames and selecting skins, often based on countries. There were a few somewhat risque skins in there when it first started out. It had quite a punky feel. It played with lots of internet memes. And so it created this ability sort of to customize it in a kind of punky way. It felt very punk. So it kind of keyed into that, especially internet kind of thing of like, yeah, fuck you, you know. And I think that made it somewhere where people like PewDiePie could kind of play. It was almost like a sort of improvisational theater space for him. And when you see that, when a game has that ability for players to kind of play with the game and kind of help you develop its culture, games can become self-perpetuating cultural phenomena. Self-perpetuating cultural phenomena, SPCP, all right? SPCP. So what it has is, you know, by using it, by talking about it, by making videos about it, this thing kind of gets on a roll, which then becomes unstoppable. You can't really plan it, and it sort of creates a huge audience, which then leads people to believe that there's a market for these kinds of games, because there's one or maybe two or maybe three, that there's a market for these kinds of games. But I would say that what we're doing is creating self-perpetuating cultural phenomena, SPCP. Okay. So, some of the key elements of I.O. were established there. The next big game that we saw, and in fact this is the biggest game in this genre, if it's a genre in this space, Slizzard Io, developed by Steve House, came out last year, March. Did a little twist on the mechanics, which was nice. And in fact, we had experimented, Mateusz had done an experiment with a snake style game with the same kind of eat, grow, evolve. Steve did an absolutely knockout job on this. Twist on the mechanics in that little guys can really easily kill big guys. So in this game, if you meet the body of another snake with your head, you die. So it doesn't matter how big you are, a little guy can take you out. And another key thing which I think sort of moved the genre on somewhat in Slither is it has a sort of Zen-like atmosphere. I think Agar.io has this as well, which is part of a wide appeal to lots of different kinds of players. That you can go into these places, these spaces, these worlds, and somewhat sort of drift away and lose yourself in them. And it's actually quite pleasant just to exist in this very simple world, so much simpler than the world we see around us. A world that's filled with Israeli ad networking executives trying to make you drink coffee out there. Thank you so much for choosing to be in here and not with the UA specialists drinking coffee out there. Give yourselves a round of applause, guys. Round of applause. Well done. Well done you. Well done you. So Slither has this, and I just love the look of it. I love the visual effects of it, and I think what it starts to do is add a level of quality and fidelity, which is really appealing, really, really appealing. And these guys are getting about 86 million visits at the moment on the web, and of course, off the back of that, they also launched a very successful mobile version of the game. I would say that then there was a third wave shortly after Slither, with a bunch of shooting games. For us, most notably Io, made by Mateusz, developer of Agario, but I would also call out Wings.io, made by Andre Almeida and his team, who's an ex-associate of ours at Miniclip. He put an air combat side-on, so not top-down anymore, side-on shooter with loads of customizations, really nice art style, again, something funny about it. I'd call out Vertix.io, which was more like a kind of Berserk style, if you remember that game. Berserk style, sort of arena shooter. Again, lots of different characters, lots of different weapon customizations. And Sidney de Vries, who made that game, started to experiment with different game modes. Most of these games at their core operate in a sort of free-for-all open arena modes. We've experimented with different modes in Agario and Io. Sidney moved it on so that there were different kind of round-based modes, challenge-based parts of the activity. But fundamentally, I think this wave saw the arrival of shooting as a kind of key mechanic, and therefore I believe they started to appeal perhaps much more predominantly to a more hardcore player. And we'll see that in some of the stats breakdown. So I mentioned earlier on, self-perpetuating cultural phenomena. Is it a market? Is it a market you can have a share of if individual titles are effectively self-perpetuating cultural phenomena? Anyway, for what it's worth, this is our view of the stats that we have. I reckon if that hadn't gone around there's nearly 192 million monthly visits on .io games that we're tracking, and there's quite a few of them. About 85% of the traffic is going to 3 games. Slither in the blue, Agario in the red, and Io in the orange. And then 15% made up of the rest. Splix is doing quite well, if you know that one. I'm starting to talk to Stan at moat.io about that one, which I think is a nice up and coming. I've taken some other statistics from Agario, the lifetime of Agario, just to give you a geographical breakdown there. USA, about a third of all traffic. Obviously, important tier 1 market. So potentially that's a lot of folks in the USA, which is super helpful to us, from a network point of view. I'd also point out that these games tend to be big in countries that don't necessarily have a big console market. So countries like Brazil, like Russia, but have really high usage of the PC as a gaming platform, inevitably, right? So guys are using their PC, looking at their PC as their primary sort of console-like gaming experience, like not mobile. So you see that. I think Turkey would be in there as well, another really important market. So if you're making these games, think about those markets: Brazil, Russia, Turkey. They may not necessarily always be the highest monetizing, but they're certainly going to give you a huge scale. You'll get a really good feel from the community there. We've gotten a lot of love from Russian guys doing YouTube stuff, and we love those guys always. The demographic stats, if you can read that, 18-24s, 25-34s, 35-44s. So it's predominantly young, very heavily skewed 18-24s. If we had the next age bracket down, you'd find a lot of guys in there as well. Interestingly, on Io, these shooting games that moved it on a little bit into that kind of more hardcore type of bullet hell mechanic, if we had that same chart, you'd see probably about 10% more 35-44s and a commensurate less 18-24. So going a bit more hardcore is going to increase your average age. But as I said, self-perpetuating cultural phenomena, just because there's players of those games doesn't necessarily mean there's a market for us to just rip those off and do the same thing. Whatever we do has to move it on. It needs to move it on mechanically. It needs to move it on in terms of quality, in terms of depth. And really that's my sort of message today, that we need to think about making new self-perpetuating cultural phenomena. Now, for developers, for sure, there's big challenges. And I call out Splix here, made by one guy, Jesper van den Ende in Amsterdam. Really sweet guy, young student, making this game something of an experiment, and kind of accidentally made the biggest game in the genre. But to a certain extent, he got into it because it was an easy thing to do. It was an interesting thing to him as a computer scientist, as an experiment. He could use various different tools to do it, lots of really nice JavaScript frameworks to work in, or you could choose to work in Unity, or there's a brilliant, I must give a shout out to Play Canvas, if anyone knows that platform. Really awesome technology for WebGL, really lightweight engine, made by some ex-Criterion guys. They're based in the UK. So big shout out to Will Eastcott and Play Canvas for bringing amazing WebGL tech to us. So he got the accessibility there, but for him to scale the game, to support the game, one guy, it's impossible, So guys need to start talking to some other partners, maybe people like us at Miniclip, someone who's going to help you actually turn this thing and run this thing as a business. Sometimes guys just don't want to do it. That's not what they got into it for. They did it as an experiment. It was something fun. They achieved some prominence. But, they want to exit even earlier than Andrew was suggesting we exit. These games are notoriously subject to hacking. So anything that achieves any kind of scale or popularity, someone will want to cheat and win. And that takes a lot of policing. It takes a lot of development to patch it, to take those guys out of the game, because they definitely ruin it for other people. These games are not often really well designed in terms of retention, because they're very quick. So there's not a lot of secondary depth in there. There's not necessarily a lot of reasons to come back for even the second day, the seventh day. So when we look at retention, they are often very low in terms of their attachment. And there's definitely a discussion and a debate. We're having this debate as to whether these games should be, very low-fi, like this one, which made it very quick, it's very easy to access, or whether we should start looking at something a little bit more high fidelity, which we're starting to do. So this game, Snowfight, came out at Christmas, made by a very great team in Utrecht, in Holland, Xform, who we've worked with for a long time. It was their first multiplayer game. And it was okay. They built it real quick in Unity, faced a lot of technical challenges to keep that accessibility right, keep the file sizes down, deal with the networking side. But for us as publishers, and for me as a publisher, for me as someone who's commissioning these things, I would rather go in this kind of direction, because to me, this starts to have a deeper chance of becoming a self-perpetuating cultural phenomenon. So as a publisher, we're looking at KPIs. The main one is retention, I think, first. So we want to see these games come out, get them to market as quickly as we can, see them have some good day one retention. But I mean, to us, on the web, that's looking like anything above like 8% day one retention, which is like crazy in terms of mobile, like real low in terms of mobile. But anything around that, I think, is looking promising. There's a challenge about the route to market. How you start to seed these things, how you start to spread the word. Obviously, you want to engage the community. Is it right for people like Miniclip to kind of be on 4chan and Reddit, trying to engage the community there? I think we work much better on some of the bigger social networks, starting to work with YouTubers, making money out of them, primarily ad-funded, but you've got to do some work in the development of integrating ads. You need to make sure that if you're working with Google, whatever partners you're working with, you're implementing it correctly. There's some technical things there, which you can get caught out by. And then it's very easy to copy, especially the lo-fi games. Very easy to copy, which is why I prefer this higher fidelity approach. And then inevitably, like everything, games have got to be discovered, right? So we are somewhat fortunate, and we have an existing network based on Dipio and Agario, to which we can launch these titles. But I would say there are definitely opportunities in this space. If you're a developer of these games, I would say if you have any interest in making super accessible, what are effectively like esports in a browser, arena-based multiplayer games, then there's something here for you. I would suggest that you think carefully about how to innovate mechanics. Please don't just do a reskin of an existing game out there. Try and find something that's mechanically interesting about it. For me, definitely try and develop it as an IP. Think of yourself as an intellectual property developer. You want to try and build a world, try and build some character. Doesn't necessarily mean 3D graphics and lots of modeling and stuff, but the thing should have an atmosphere and should have a vibe. It should be a place that you want to be. This game, Ovario, which I commissioned from a team in Buenos Aires, Ocam, will come out shortly, and it tries to have a sense of humor. It's a game in which you play sperm, and your challenge is to fertilize as many eggs as you can against the other players in your arena. And next, we're working on a game called Brutes, Brutes.io. Sign up for the beta. Trying to move it on again. Brutes is made by a really amazing team, Bulletproof, in New Zealand, actually spread around the world. It's an evolution-based brawler, arena multiplayer. It will play in the browser, but we're also hopeful that with our new publishing channels onto console and PC, that we can establish that title as a new IP for them. Similarly, another amazing game, Slizzard Io by a French team called Spinbot. Really high quality, arena-based shooter. Again, should be coming out as an IO from Miniclip shortly. Now, I'm running out of time. I'm conscious that I've been rambling on. I built up your energy at the start, and now I've brought it down again to crush it for William, who's coming next. So guys, thank you ever so much for listening. If you have any .io games, if you want to ask any questions about this stuff, or anything else about Miniclip and our publishing and development activities, call me, okay? Call me, yeah? Thank you so much.
Hi, thanks. Very great presentation. I think it's an interesting concept that you said that these .io games had this punk feel to it.
Right.
And so you as a publisher has a really interesting challenge there. Do you want to destroy it in the name of publishing? They have this bad name already. Or can you, actually make them commercial without ruining that feel?
Yeah, it's like the Sex Pistols and EMI, right? So it's really challenging for, we're not a huge company, but we have a corporate responsibility. When Ovario started, one of the skins that you could choose, which I think was meant ironically, was if you typed your username as Nazi, it would make your skin a swastika. And of course, the kind of fuck you kind of trolls on the internet thought that was hilarious and did it. And we had a long discussion of well, as a publisher, we can't really have that in the game. But if we take it out, are we killing this kind of punkiness of it? We took it out, right? We took it out. It's just not right. It's just not right. It's still too taboo. But it's a challenge. It's a challenge, right? And it's a challenge that, for me, I like things that are subversive. I'm the publisher, right? So I want things that are subversive. I want things that people are going to find entertaining, that are real, right? I think that's the punk thing, is just be real, right? Don't spam people with kind of faceless marketing. As a developer, we want you to engage. We don't want to be an interface between it. We want to encourage that relationship between you and the people at home. And that's what people buy into, that sense of reality and that sense of connection with something that feels real and authentic. That's what it is. It's authentic. So let's try and retain that. I think I'm out of time. I really appreciate your question. Thank you, guys. Have a great show, great conference. Come and find me if you want to talk later.